Jodi Arias, I mean, what can be said about a case like this?
The case was all about fear, love, sex, lies, and dirty little secrets.
You have a beautiful woman, you have this GQ type, and you have a crime so unimaginable, it defies explanation. And the world pays attention to it.
This pure, holy Mormon, in reality, was having sex and living a double life. Even though they were broken up, they continued to engage in sex.
Looking back on things in hindsight, I think that sort of became the beginning of the end.
This rejection for Jodi is a seed within her dark soul that begins to grow, begins to fester, and sooner or later, it's gonna blossom. You just look at her and you think, how could she have done that? But you know what? Jodi Arias is a psychopath. She wanted to make that guy suffer.
Mesa is a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, a pretty good-sized city that kind of bleeds into Phoenix. Mesa also has a very large Mormon community, which is a key reason that attracted Travis Alexander to move there in the first place. Travis was born into a pretty rough life, he and his siblings.
His parents were both drug addicts. He had 7 siblings. So you have all these kids and you have 2 drug addicts trying to take care of them, and they just can't.
Eventually, they had to move out of their parents' house and moved in with his grandparents. It was his grandmother, actually, that turned him on to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which got him into Mormonism, which he eventually converted to.
Travis really gravitates towards this Mormon church. He becomes a missionary, of course, and he throws his soul into this. It's really feeding a part of him that was missing from that horrible childhood. He's getting from this religion what he didn't get from his parents.
As Travis got older, he started doing more activities and speaking to more groups, and was trying to convert other people. Travis became really deeply involved in that, and it really changed his life for the better. It launched him into his career with a company called Prepaid Legal, where he really took off and became a well-known, charismatic figure in the company.
Prepaid Legal is a multi-level marketing company. They sell legal insurance in tiers, and they can work their way up. The more that they sell, the more people they recruit, the more money they can make.
Travis was a really good public speaker, would speak at a lot of Prepaid Legal events.
He thrives. He becomes one of their best employees. And it's at one of the conferences that he goes to that he runs into this gorgeous, really attractive woman who seems charming, caring, and loving, Jodi Arias.
He was attending a conference in Las Vegas. At that time, Jodi had been struggling, bouncing from one job to the next, and was looking for an opportunity to better herself. So she went to the conference, and that's where they both met. Travis saw Jodi across the room, thought she was the most beautiful girl at the conference, and walked straight up to her. He said hi and looked at her in the eyes, and she smiled back. And from there, that chemistry connected them right away.
In contrast to Travis's life, growing up, Jodi lived a pretty good life as a child. Grew up in Northern California with, by all accounts, loving parents who were in the restaurant business. Jodi worked as a waitress in their restaurant and really had a normal childhood growing up. Dated different men as a child and into her teen years, sort of trying to find herself. She was always sort of a bit lost, trying to figure out what she wanted to do with her life.
They spend a week at this conference talking, kissing, enjoying each other's company, and Travis wants to see her again, even though they live in different states.
They start dating long distance for some time while she's living in California and he's living in Mesa, Arizona, often meeting halfway around the California-Arizona border. Travis saw a beautiful young girl who seemed very fun to hang out with, and that's what sort of drew Travis to her. She's seeing a handsome young up-and-comer in a big company and possibly somebody that could be marriage material down the road.
Travis presented himself as a devout Mormon. He told people he was a 30-year-old virgin and that he planned on getting married in the Mormon faith. While Travis presented himself as a virgin, he and Jody were secretly engaged in sexual relations. Travis tried to skirt his religious beliefs by having untraditional sex to try and skirt around the Mormon belief to not have sex before marriage.
Travis never told other people that she was his girlfriend. Never told his friend, this is my girlfriend, Jody.
Jody's not Mormon, nor is she a virgin. She had been in live-in relationships with a couple different guys, and so it was a very different background from what Travis was looking for in a wife.
Jody decides, okay, if you don't like the way I am now, all right, I'll convert. She becomes Mormon, she's baptized, and she gives Travis seemingly everything she thinks he wants.
Through his work, Travis had won a trip to Cancun, and he told Jody he was taking her.
He's gonna have to work hard, but he can also play hard too, in a beautiful, beautiful place. So, maybe I'll bring Jody with me. That'll be a good idea. And Jody's excited. I mean, she's going to Mexico with this guy that she loves, and they're gonna have a ball. The problem is, the relationship just turns sour, tumultuous. They argue, they fight, they don't get along. These are two totally different people.
At one point, Travis decides that it's not going to work out, and he breaks up with Jody. Then, after the breakup, he decided he wasn't going to take her anymore.
Travis decided he was going to take another woman.
Jody was not happy about the breakup. She had changed her entire life to be with Travis. She had converted to the Mormon faith, and she did that with the intention of being with him. And after that, she makes the surprising decision to pick up and move to Mesa, just a few miles from Travis's house. Jody says that she wants to be closer to the Mormon faith, and she wants to start her life over in Mesa, but Travis believes that she moved there to be with him. Even though they were broken up, they continued to engage in sex. Travis would call her late at night, and she would come over to his house just for sex. So she continued to stay in his life. 9 months after she moved to Mesa, she's noticed that Travis was dating other girls. Finally, it seemed that Jody had enough, and she moved back to California and back into her grandparents' house.
A few weeks later, they called the police. There had been a burglary at the house, and what was strange about the burglary was not much was taken.
They only stole a gun and a couple of Jody's possessions from her room. This was an old gun, low caliber, and it was never recovered.
Jody Arias continued to work for the company Prepaid Legal, even after her relationship with Travis Alexander ended. It was through that same company that she met another man named Ryan Burns. Shortly after the burglary of her grandparents' California home, Jody was scheduled to partake in a business trip to Salt Lake City, Utah, which also happened to be where Ryan Burns lived. She decided to make it a joint venture, both a business trip for Prepaid Legal and a personal trip to visit her new boyfriend. Meanwhile, Travis, who was extremely dedicated to his job, seemed to have stopped responding to work obligations.
Travis misses a conference call on the 4th. By the 9th, his friends are really concerned because they haven't heard from him.
The girl that was supposed to go with Travis to Cancun started getting very alarmed. Her bags were packed, and she hadn't heard from Travis. She called all his friends and gathered a few of them to go to the house and search for Travis. They search the downstairs floor. They find Travis's wallet. They see his computer. They see his bike and his car are in the garage. There's no sign of him.
It's like the guy disappeared. Where did he go?
Investigation.
Because he had made something of himself after his upbringing, Travis used that as a motivational tool. He spoke at these conferences about what he had overcome, and people were impressed.
Travis Alexander turned his troubled past into drive and motivation. His passion was so apparent that he was able to mesmerize an audience, much like televangelist Joel Osteen, captivating large audiences with his success story.
A lot of this goes back to his roots in Mormonism when he converted over and sort of found who he was.
Jody was a happy, pretty girl, grew up in a middle-class neighborhood, seemed a world away from the background that Travis grew up in.
It gets to the point where they break up, but Travis is still having sex with her. And Jody's beginning to feel like, all I am to you is this side piece? That's not gonna work for me.
She moved back to Northern California to live with her grandparents.
At that time, Jody was scheduled to go on a business trip through Prepaid Legal to Utah.
She rented a car. She spent the next day or so driving down the coast, visited some friends in Central California, and was moving along, making her way to go see Ryan Burns.
They made out, they watched movies. She spent a romantic 2 days, and then Jody said that she had to leave and get back to California.
According to court records, Jody Arias rented a car for her trip to Salt Lake City. She picked up the vehicle on June 2nd, 2008, set out on her trip the following day, and then returned the car on June 7th. During that 5-day period, she drove 2,800 miles. Meanwhile, in Mesa, Arizona, her ex-boyfriend, Travis Alexander, stopped answering his cell phone and could not be reached by friends or family.
Shortly before he was supposed to go to Mexico on this trip with another female friend, she had not heard from him, and she's starting to get worried because I think they're supposed to leave in a day or two.
For Travis, his work was really his life. He was invested in it. He was passionate about it. He misses a conference call on the 4th, and that is so unlike Travis. He would never miss a conference call.
She called all his friends and gathered a few of them to go to the house and search for Travis. On the way there, they get the access code to his garage. It was not like him to just leave. And his car was still in the garage, his bike was in the garage. No one knew where he had gone. They make their way into the home, and right away they notice there's a very odd smell. They get to the top of the landing and they hear noise coming from one of the other rooms. It was one of Travis's roommates that was in the house with his girlfriend.
Travis lived with several roommates. Once his concerned friends entered the home, they discovered that one of the roommates was in the house. Travis's friends approached the roommate to inquire about his whereabouts.
The roommates noticed a bad smell in the house that seemed to get worse, but these were 3 bachelor roommates, so they thought that one of them had left something in the refrigerator or that possibly Travis's dog had made a mess.
You could write it off as anything. Dirty dishes, garbage, whatever. This is kind of a bachelor pad, you know? Men do smelly things.
Once Travis's roommates were made aware that Travis was missing, the group collectively decided to gain access to his locked bedroom.
The roommate gets a key to Travis's master bedroom and they go inside. As the doors are open, this putrid stench billows out of the room, and the roommate and Travis's friend both enter the bedroom to make their way to the bathroom. They spot the dead body in the shower.
Travis's friends immediately call 911 and sort of frantic, telling them that their friend is dead. He's been butchered. The smell is horrendous. His body had been in there for a few days. There was blood everywhere.
Travis was severely decomposed. His body was stuffed in the shower stall. Travis had been stabbed multiple times. There was a cluster of stab wounds in his back. He had defensive wounds on his hands. He had been shot in the face, and there was a puncture mark straight in his chest that penetrated his heart.
So they're talking to 911. They've obviously got detectives on the way over there, and the dispatcher is asking if they know of anyone who might have had it out for him. And from that first 911 call, Jody's name is mentioned. They say, Jody, that he had been seeing this girl, Jody. He had this sort of double personality. On one side, he presented himself to his friends and his family and his church members as a devout Mormon who was chaste and ready to find a good woman to settle down with and have a family with. And on the other side, he sort of lived this secret life where he did go out with women and dated women on the side and sort of kept his 2 lives separately. Travis's friends can't get a hold of him, so they go to his house. And immediately upon entering the house, they smell this sort of putrid smell. So when police arrive, they find just a horrendous scene. His throat had been just slit from ear to ear. The medical examiner later testified that his head was practically cut off. It was a very deep cut, and he had one gunshot wound in his forehead as well.
Travis's death was ruled a homicide. The coroner discovered that 3 of the wounds would have been fatal. He would have died from his throat being slit, the puncture wound to his chest, or the shot to the head. The sheets have been removed from the bed. There's blood trails everywhere. On one of the walls, they discover an errant hair, a long brown hair. Downstairs, they see blood on the washing machine. And when they open it up, they discover the sheets from the bed and also a digital camera. The digital camera had been run through the washing machine. It was damaged.
So the camera ends up going off to the crime lab and for forensics so they could see if they could recover any photos from it.
They also find bloody palm prints on the walls and other areas.
Travis's friends all come forward and testify that Jody had a history of stalking Travis, that when he was engaged in a new relationship, she would look into the windows, she would go by his house. At one point, his tires were slashed twice in a row. There were notes left on the car to the women he was dating. Jewelry went missing from his house. Everyone believed that Jody was the one who was stalking Travis because she was jealous.
On June 7th, 2008, Jody returned home from her trip to Salt Lake City. She had been traveling for 5 days, and shortly after her return, she learned that her ex-boyfriend had been brutally murdered.
Jody starts posting memorial photos talking about Travis being her best friend and her soulmate, and that she's so upset that he had left this world early and that she planned on seeing him again one day. She seemed like a distraught former girlfriend.
Jody is online posting all these pictures in dedication and honor of Travis. So you have 2 contradicting, conflicting themes going on here. You have a bunch of friends who are saying this woman was a horrible person, hated this guy, was always fighting with this guy, and if someone wanted him dead, it's her. And then you have her. She's posting all these walks on the beach in the sunset like their relationship was out of a storybook.
From the start, as she's reaching out to police, offering any assistance she can and expressing dismay, and she's crying, obviously so sad that her friend Travis has been murdered.
Jody comes forward and says, I want to help. I want to give you everything you need. DNA, saliva, whatever. She says, I wasn't even in Mesa at the time that he was killed. I haven't even seen him since April. Whatever you need, I have for you. I want to help all I can.
She said she'd be willing to take a polygraph test. She voluntarily gives her DNA samples and says that she wants to help catch this guy who killed her beloved ex-boyfriend. Piecing together Travis's last phone calls and actions on the computer, they believe Travis had decomposed inside his master bathroom for 5 days. For 5 days, his roommates lived with his dead body in the bedroom.
The digital camera is an interesting piece of evidence because whoever put it in the washing machine likely thought, you know what, it's going to wipe out whatever's on the card. But of course it doesn't.
On the camera, they find erotic photographs of Jody and Travis laying on the bed together, half naked, some naked, and they're all time-stamped. So it's clear to detectives now that Jody's lying to them, that she was there on the day he was murdered. Not just hadn't seen him in a few months, but was actually there on the day he was murdered.
Travis Alexander's death was ruled a homicide. Travis had 3 roommates. When asked if Travis had any enemies, the first thing that they say is Jody. That was the one person that they knew. Travis had accused her of stalking him, of calling him at all hours of the night. All his friends knew that Jody had been bothering Travis.
Her story from the very beginning was that she hadn't seen Travis in several months. He had asked her to come visit him before he went to Mexico when she was taking her road trip to see this man in Salt Lake City, but she told him she wasn't going to be able to make it.
The police, at first, they think the crime is so brutal that two people must have committed the murder. It was such overkill.
So as police are investigating the scene, a lot of strange things are sort of popping up. One thing that seemed strange was that it appeared as if whoever had committed this crime had tried to clean it up. Some of the blood was smeared, some of it was washed away, his body had been sort of half washed clean, the sheets on the bed were gone. So they start searching the house, they find Travis's washing machine, and inside the washing machine, they find some sheets and Travis's digital camera, which obviously was a strange thing to find in a washing machine. On the camera, they find erotic photographs of Jody and Travis laying on the bed together, half naked, some naked, and they're all timestamped.
Based on the recovered photos, Jody had lied to police about not seeing Travis since April 2008. The evidence proved that Jody was the last person to see him alive. The recovered images, which were time-stamped at approximately 1:40 p.m. on June 4th, showed Jody and Travis in sexually suggestive poses. The last photograph of Alexander before his death showed him in the shower at 5:29 p.m. that same day. Photos taken moments later show an individual, believed to be Travis, bleeding profusely on the bathroom floor.
Their investigation obviously is continuing to go forward, but she's still sticking to her story that she wasn't there.
When police confront her, Jody says she had been nowhere near Arizona.
So as the case progresses, Jody and all of Travis's friends agree to offer up their blood for DNA testing in comparison against all the rest of the blood in the house. And eventually they come to determine that the bloody palm print had blood containing both Jody and Travis's blood. Eventually, they think they've got enough evidence to bring a charge against her, so they bring it to the grand jury, and they do get an indictment. The evidence they have of the DNA and the bloody palm print, the photographs showing she was there, lots of other things that are just not adding up, and she is arrested and taken into custody.
They charge her with first-degree murder, and she pleads, of course, not guilty.
Jody's still sticking with her story, even when presented with photographs and timestamps that prove she was there on the very day and time he was murdered.
While she's being interrogated, the police leave her alone, and Jody is doing yoga moves and headstands in the interrogation room. She's singing to herself. She seems completely disconnected from what she's actually going through.
So it wasn't until a few months after her arrest that Jody started to realize she was sort of backed into a corner with the evidence that they had that put her there at the time of the crime. So she comes up with this second story that was sort of more outlandish than the first.
Travis and I were in bed together. Jody admits that she had been in Arizona, but that she was not the one who committed the murder. Jody said that Travis convinced her to drive down to Arizona as a detour to her trip so that they could be together once again. They had sex that morning, they were together, they took photos, and then Jody says that someone broke into the house and killed Travis. No, no, no!
She describes a pair of masked intruders, a man and a woman, breaking into Travis's house, beating him up, holding them both at gunpoint, at which point she says they attacked Travis brutally, murdering him.
Jody Arias' behavior seemed so bizarre that on May 18th, 2009, the court ordered her to submit to IQ and competency testing. Police then investigated Jody Arias' movements and phone records around the time of the murder. They revealed that she had called Travis 4 times on June 2nd, 2008. She then embarked on her trip to Salt Lake City, Utah, the following day.
On June 2nd, Jody called Travis multiple times. Eventually, they connected on the phone. Jody went to pick up her rental car in another city. She stops for gas cans and heads towards the Arizona border. It was very odd that she would decide to get gas cans. It seemed like she wanted to get somewhere very quickly and didn't want anyone to see her on camera getting gas. At that point, her phone is shut off and is not turned on for another 24 hours. Jody was the type of person who was always on her phone, so it was really odd that she would turn off her phone for almost 24 hours.
The recovered time-stamped photos from Travis Alexander's camera showed that he was murdered on June 4th. By June 5th, Jody had arrived in Utah and met up with her new boyfriend, Ryan Burns.
When Ryan sees her in Salt Lake City, he senses something strange going on. She's got these injuries on her hand. You know, they're not surface injuries. These are deep cuts on her hand.
He really didn't think anything of it because he said she sort of acted normal as usual, so there wasn't anything for him to be suspicious of. As she's leaving Salt Lake City and heading back to life as normal in Northern California, she called Travis's cell phone several times and left messages.
Give me a call back, okay? Bye.
So about 2 years after her arrest, story number 3 comes out. And story number 3 now is that she was indeed there, as she was when the intruders were there, but now she's admitting to killing Travis. But she's admitting she killed him in self-defense. She's claiming that Travis was a brutal womanizer, that he would beat her, physically abuse her, verbally abuse her. And on this day, when she was there visiting him, he asked her to take photographs of him in the shower. As she's doing so, she accidentally drops his brand new digital camera, at which point he flies into a rage and charges her and is coming at her. She thinks she's going to die.
The problem with that defense is multi-layered. And here's why. Because he has stab wounds and a gunshot wound. So if you're defending yourself, you shoot the guy and you go. If you're defending yourself with a knife, you stab him, you slash him, you go. But we have a gunshot wound, and then we have stab wounds, and we have his throat slit. That's rage. That's hatred. Rage and hatred, self-defense, they don't mesh. On the stand, I mean, of course, Jody begins at the beginning. The fact that Jodi Arias testified for 18 days is perfect for her personality. If I can just sit there long enough, I can explain to everybody what happened and they're gonna believe me. That's how she thinks.
Jody seemed to relish the attention in court. She loved that everyone was there for her. She would frequently look back into the galley and see who's there for her.
She begins to describe a childhood of abuse and, you know, this dysfunctional life that she led as a child and how that led into her meeting this guy who was abusive and had all these weird sexual desires and needs that she tried to conform with. Jodi Arias begins to talk about their sexual life, and she describes he had these fetishes, and she goes on and on about all these salacious details about their sexual life. What Jody is saying on the stand is that I'm the victim here. You all gotta look at me. I'm the victim.
Travis did lead her on. While he was dating these other girls, these virgins that he wanted to marry, he was still sleeping with Jody.
Jody always felt like he's using me. I'm never gonna be the wife, the person that he wants. He's just gonna use me for sex.
Travis did not treat her well. But physically abusive was a different story. The reason that was so important was because the whole murder, the whole killing that Jody claimed was self-defense was based on the fact that Travis had been physically abusive to her in the past, and on this final day tried to kill her, and it was fight or flight, and she fought back, and instead of dying herself, she had to fight back.
The problem I have with this is, why didn't Jody say it was self-defense from the beginning? Why didn't she run to the cops, say, this is what happened. I killed this guy in self-defense.
You watch the jury come in every morning to kind of get a cue of whether you think a verdict's coming today or not. They're a little more dressed up, so you're kind of looking for these cues, something that we didn't see. And then all of a sudden they come in and it's announced that the jury's reached a verdict.
After the photos are recovered from the memory card, police arrest Jody and confront her with the evidence. At first, she denies being at the scene. Then she says that 2 people broke in and killed Travis right in front of her. Finally, she admits that she was there and she killed Travis, but it was in self-defense.
There were a lot of things that were triggers, at least for Travis's friends, that there was something wrong with this woman. Friends were very suspicious of her. She did some odd things. She'd follow him around. She'd try to get into his social media accounts. Slashed his tires, apparently, on 1 or more occasions. There was a time Travis woke up, found her sleeping in his house. She had apparently crawled in through the doggy door to get into his house. What was interesting, just sort of the tumultuous nature of the whole case. The defense did ask for multiple mistrials, which were denied on various topics, from prosecutorial misconduct to jurors being dismissed. But, you know, what was also interesting to me is that, you know, Kirk Nermy, her defense attorney, he tried to get off the damn case, like, several times. He wanted nothing to do with this case from the beginning, and Judge Stevens just would not let him get off the case.
Police are able to determine that she had stopped at a Walmart on her trip and bought gas cans, and they had records of her stopping to fill these gas cans. So it appeared to police that she had done that in an effort to avoid stopping and being seen on surveillance video getting gas anywhere near Arizona. Jody claimed in court that she had bought those gas cans but later returned them, and that it was actually a week later that she came back and tried to return the gas cans. That was vital in proving that she had thought about this and planned this murder for quite a long time. When Jody returned the car to the rental place, even though she said that she was staying in town, she had put thousands of miles on the car, and the floor mats were missing from both the front and the back.
When Ryan testifies, he describes spending hours with her, hugging, kissing, whatever they were doing.
The defense presents their own expert witnesses. The prosecution has their own expert witnesses. They both trot out their own psychologists and psychiatrists to depict Jody and Travis in different lights. It's the battle of the experts.
Several psychologists come forward and say that Jody was an abused woman and that she had, acted in self-defense.
It was fight or flight, she was trapped. She felt cornered. She had to defend herself. She had to kill the guy because she was in fear for her own life.
The defense experts are saying Jody suffered from PTSD. She has this sort of fog during the murder and after the murder. All symptoms of PTSD, all symptoms of someone who's suffering from abuse, physical and verbal abuse. Prosecution's witness obviously presents a completely different story of a woman who suffers from borderline personality disorder, narcissistic, just sort of a rageful woman. So it just came down to the jury looking at these experts and trying to determine who they believed. There's no doubt, based on recorded conversations, based on letters that were presented as evidence, that Travis was not really nice to Jody.
At one point, they engaged in light S&M play. He liked to tie her up. She had a role-playing game where she was Little Red Riding Hood and he was the big bad wolf. She would go to his house and he would open the door and she would give him oral sex while he was standing in the doorway of his home and then throw candy at her and she would leave.
Travis was clearly using her for sex. She saw in him someone she was in love with, she wanted to settle down with, at least according to her. So there were these sort of conflicting images that were being shown throughout the trial.
She claimed that over the course of their relationship, Travis became very physically abusive. She claimed that he had hit her and broke her finger at one point, that he had kicked her while she was on the ground and bruised her ribs. All this had led to her being fearful of Travis, and the day that she was with him, on the last day, she said he got into a rage and that she was just defending herself. Travis's exes come forward and they say that although he did lie about being a virgin, he was respectful in the relationships and that he never was physically abusive.
The prosecution also addressed the robbery at Jody's grandparents' house at the end of May 2008, just days before Travis's murder. Though there was a reported break-in, very few items were taken. The only notable stolen item was a gun. Prosecutors then made the assertion that among Travis Alexander's many injuries, he also suffered a gunshot wound to the head. Neither the stolen gun nor the murder weapon were ever recovered, but the gun used in the murder happened to be the same caliber weapon that went missing from the grandparents' home.
I mean, they could have easily washed that away by saying, yeah, Jody screwed up. She lied to the police. She did take the gun herself, but she only brought it for self-defense because she was scared of Travis, but they didn't want to touch that. And the coincidence of a gun being stolen within weeks of the murder that happens to be the exact same caliber gun was, I just think, too much of a coincidence for the jury to buy.
Police believe that Jody came to Travis's house, that she had planned it for quite a while. I believe she might have planned it all the way back from when she moved from Arizona back to California. So she used this trip to set this alibi, and she made plans to see Travis while she was down there. Jody prepared for this trip by renting a car outside of the city that she lived, by getting gas cans so that she wouldn't have to stop, by turning off her cell phone when she was near the Arizona border. Jody was waiting for a time for him to be vulnerable, where she could get into a place where she could kill him. They had sex, he got in the shower, and she said that she wanted to take a photo shoot of him. At that point, she takes the knife and she stabs him in the chest. He tries to defend himself, and they fight in the bathroom, and his throat is slit. But she still wanted to make sure he was dead, so she finished him off with a bullet. And then they believe that Jody washed him off, tried to get rid of the evidence, and put the sheets in the washer along with the digital camera. She didn't know that those photos could be recovered, and she thought she damaged the camera enough by running it through the washer. Unbeknownst to her, those photos revealed everything. On May 7th, 2013, after 15 hours of deliberation, the jury comes back and finds Jody guilty of murdering Travis. The day of the verdict, the courthouse was mobbed by people. Thousands of people were outside the courthouse, and when the jury verdict came back that she was guilty, they cheered. The public was very much against Jody, and the atmosphere outside the courthouse was like O.J. Simpson's trial that day. It was the most insane thing I've ever seen.
I can't say it was surprising. I mean, I think all the courtroom knew that this was going to be a guilty verdict. I mean, the evidence was just too much to overcome. I got to think the defense even knew in the back of their mind they were probably going to get a guilty verdict here. But the key thing for them is to save her life now. So after the jury convicted her of murder, they take her back into a cell, and the next phase would be the penalty phase to determine whether she's going to face life or death in prison. And she goes one more shot. She wants her moment of fame as well, and gives an interview right after she's convicted of murder, gives an interview with a local TV reporter talking about how she would rather die than be sent to prison for the rest of her life. And it's really unclear if she was trying to speak to jurors, but it was just the strangest thing for a defendant in a murder trial to be convicted of murder and then turn around and give a television interview before the same jury is going to decide whether you live or die.
They can't agree on a sentence. The jury is deadlocked on whether or not to give her the death penalty. Due to Arizona law, the prosecutor pursues the death penalty once again, and they have a second trial, and during that trial, the jury is once again unable to decide, and she's automatically sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
The media wanted to make this into a big thing because of all these salacious details, and they did. They did a good job at it.
People were just fascinated with this case, and they were fascinated with Jody. What caused this beautiful young girl to kill her boyfriend in such a brutal manner?
This case drew so much media attention, a frenzy, if you will, a circus as a cliche, that even Donald Trump, before he was president, tweeted about it. And Jodi Arias even developed a sort of fan club, really. people who just started to believe in her. And that's what this person, this psychopath, is really good at. Charming people.
In prison, Jodi actually adjusted quite well. She's kind of a queen bee behind bars. She has a lot of friends. She frequently gets in trouble with the guards for talking back, but she has carved out a lifestyle behind bars where she's quite popular. There's been multiple appeals. None of them have had a very strong base, and she's soon to exhaust her appeals. Jodi's defense attorney ended up getting disbarred for writing a book about Jodi. He ended up getting cancer right after the trial and was so discouraged and felt like he had been run through the ringer with Jodi as a client. He said she was such an awful client that he actually believes that she gave him cancer because of the stress. The psychologists who defended Jodi in court were later mobbed by people online who went after them and their reputations. The public sentiment was so against her that anyone who came forward and defended Jodi was a villain as well. So she ended up destroying multiple lives.
Even this murder, she had to make dramatic. Even killing this guy wasn't enough for her. She had to make it grandiose. She had to make it bigger than, more than. Because why? Because she's Jodi Arias, and that's what she does. This rejection for Jodi is a seed within her dark soul that begins to grow, begins to fester, and she decided to kill him for that. It's really that simple. Jodi Arias is a lying, manipulative, cunning psychopath. That's who she is. That will never change.